Hello friends, this is Lachhwani reporting the final oral presentation for the course. So starting with a quick recap on my defined phase. So my goal of the project was to reduce 5 pounds per month for 4 consecutive months. And the measurable activities to achieve my goal that I decided will be doing were walking 10,000 steps for 4 times a week, and avoiding intake of dessert after the meals. So let's see how I did in this project. I started collecting data from the month of September, and here is the data for September. So what I did basically is using an iPhone application, I track the steps I walk in a day, and for the second piece of dessert intake, I would write on a calendar. If I did take a desert, I would write yes. If no, no. And this is how my data looks like. So for example, started collecting data from September 11th. So as you can see, for September 11th, I have 12,783 steps walked on that day, and I did not take desert. What I did with this data is I plotted that on an X bar chart. So this is the very first chart. This is for just for the month of September. As you can see, it looks like my process is in control, but maybe it's not, because if I have to, define a spec, like for example, targeting 10,000 steps. So the spec limit for my process, if I have to keep my process in tight control, I would define, if I'm not able to achieve the target, anything between 6,000 to 14,000 would still be okay or be achievable. So as you can see here, the range of my data is way wider than if I have to define something compared to that. In this example, my range is somewhere from -4,000 to 22,000, and that is why it seems that the process is in control, but in true conditions it's not. And we will see that further down the line in this project or the presentation. Next thing, what I did with the data is I plotted I plotted my non-conformities on a C chart. And what my non-conformities are, for example, if I was not able to achieve my 10,000 goal for any particular day, that would be my one non-conformity. And the second non-conformity was if on the same day, if I'm not able to achieve the step goal, and I did eat dessert as well after the meal. So that would be my second non-conformity. So at max, I would have two non-conformities in my sample, and zero non-conformity when I was able to achieve 10,000 steps. Also, I did not eat dessert. So this is what the chart looks like for my non-conformities for the month of September. Now, as I said, the range for my data was way wider. So I definitely needed to make some improvements to make that range much tighter. So what I did, I plotted the root cause effect diagram. Here I took four categories: behavior, environment, work, and family. And I kept recording the reasons why I was not able to achieve my goal for any particular day. For example, for environment, if it was raining outside or if the temperatures were too cold or too hot, I would record that under temperature. For behavior, if I was feeling laziness, or I was having temptation to eat sweets or dessert after the meal, that is considered to be under the behavior category. Work, if I worked long hours and I came home tired, and that's why I didn't go to gym or completed my steps by walking on the treadmill, that would be considered under the work. And family finally would be, especially over the weekends, when I'm spending time with families or inviting friends over dinner, and that is why I didn't get chance to complete my steps for that particular day. So these are my main four categories. I kept recording the data on the calendar in an Excel sheet. And with that data, I plotted the Pareto chart. and looks like my main two categories are the long work hours, and the second biggest category is the family or the social events. Long hours would be, if I'm working for 12 hours in office and coming back home, feeling very tired, so not completing the work. So my improvement strategy in that category would be to limit the number of meetings and delegate tasks if possible. What happens here is I have to attend too many meetings while at work, to make improvement strategies at work itself. So my plan for next couple of months would be to minimize the number of meetings that I have to plan. Maybe have small conversations over the phone with coworkers or with other department managers, and plan activities which may not take 30 minutes of the meeting or 1 hour of the meeting. Rather get the information I need within 5 minutes of phone conversation. So by limiting the number of meetings, I would be able to get much work done in a short time and get home quicker so I can focus on completing my goal. Second, for family or social category, if I'm planning for friends out party or spending time with family over the weekend, I would rather be much more. I would plan the things ahead of time. For example, if I know something is gonna take my time away over this coming weekend, I would plan and get up early in the morning and complete my step goals so that those things doesn't hinder my project. Third thing, tired. How I will be able to overcome this category is by participating in the community yoga activities or eating healthy food, which will give me energy, or which will improve my energy within the body so that I'm able to work on my goals. Next is my steps data for the month of October. I did the same exercise what I did for the September data, plotted on a line chart. So as you can see here, after employing the improvement strategies, the range of my line chart or the X bar chart became narrower. This time, instead of going to minus 40,000 for the lower action limit, I'm just having like around 20,000 my lower control limit, which tells me whatever improvement strategies I have put in place are actually working for me. And from this graph also, I was able to conclude that if you see the first half of the graph, it's a normal distribution, but the last part of the graph, I can see it's more inclined towards the top part of the graph or above the target line, which means my graph is inclining towards the non-normal distribution. And this is good, which means I'm able to achieve my target more number of times in a week or in a month. Same thing again for the November. This is my data for the November, and I did the same thing for November as well. I plotted the X bar chart and the R chart for the November data. On November, you'll see my range is even more narrower compared to October. Here I was able to, the graph looks normal distribution. My target or the lower control limit is somewhere around 5,800 and higher is around 15,000. So it's much narrower, and the things are working out for me from the improvement strategies. Finally, this is the X bar chart showing all 3 months on the same graph. You can clearly see here, the first half of the graph is way higher ranges. The standard deviation on my graph was way higher, maybe out of spec process, but later in the graph you can see the process is way under control, and it's more closer to the target line. Next thing what I did is did the hypothesis testing. See, okay, I was able to see the improvement in the X bar chart, but are those differences significant enough to be able to make an effect? So here, as you know, like I don't have the population variance, but I was able to calculate the standard deviation of my sample. For example, month of September, I collected data for 20 days. So 20 was my sample size. I did the average number of steps walked for that month, calculated the standard deviation, and finally used this formula for t statistics, uh, having the population variance unequal and unknown. And also, I calculated the degree of freedom using the formula v equals to s1 squared by n1, or the bottom formula as shown in the presentation. So what were the results of my hypothesis testing? My hypothesis testing showed that the t0 value for two means. So first I compared the September and the October. And the t0 value I calculated out of the data was negative 0.89. And the degree of freedom based off this data was 30.07. And critical value, when I checked on the t-distribution chart using alpha 0.05, I got the critical value as 2.04. So negative 0.89 being in between negative 2.04 and positive 2.04, I cannot reject the null hypothesis, which means, maybe there's no significant difference between the two data. I did the same thing for the data for September and November, and I got the t0 value of negative 1.35, and the degree of freedom this time was 20.9. Therefore, the critical value of the t-distribution, considering alpha 0.05, is 2.07. Again, I'm negative 1.35 being in between negative 2.07 and positive 2.07. I cannot reject the null hypothesis again this time. But it's getting more closer to be able to overpass the null hypothesis, which means, if I continue this trend, maybe pretty soon I will be able to surpass and reject my null hypothesis. And both these months, the null hypothesis cannot be rejected. That means, there's no significant difference in the steps walked, or the average number of steps walked in these 2 months. Also, I calculated the CP and CPK values for October and October and November. As I mentioned earlier, if I have to consider the specs of my project or of my measurable goals, I would consider the range of 6,000 steps to 14,000 steps, being 10,000 as a target line. So I calculated CP and CPK based off those numbers, and the CP and CPK for October I got was 0.48 and 0.46, which means my process was not within my spec limits, and my process capability was greater than the specs, and that is why my process is not able to produce results within the spec limits. I did the same calculations for November, and I got very similar results. This time I got CPK value of CP value of 0.83 and CPK value of 0.77, and this is a little improvement compared to the October data, but still my process is not able to produce the results within the spec limits. So my goal of the project was to reduce 5 pounds for over 4 months. September, before the project, I started with 224 pounds. In October, this is based off average weight taken 10 days randomly during the month. So September, I was weighing around 224 pounds. In October, I reduced 4 pounds. So that's great. I reduced 4 pounds for October to 220 pounds. November, I was weighing 218 pounds. So of course, it's pretty visible from the data that I was not able to achieve my goal. That's sad, but I'm happy to lose some weight with this exercise, and I'll continue to make improvements and do some root cause analysis to find ways to be able to efficiently lose weight. So whatever exercises I did or whatever measurements I took, they definitely had some positive impact on my goal, but not enough to achieve my goal. Next steps in my